Hey listeners, we're nearing the end of our 15th anniversary fundraising campaign, and we need your help to meet our goal. This campaign offers you a chance to win a unique food and music experience in one of the most exciting cities in America. Here's how it works. Donate to HRN and you'll be entered to win dinner for two and 2 tickets to a concert in one of 8 amazing cities: New York, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, Nashville, Las Vegas, Charleston, Ardmore, Pennsylvania, and Asheville. All donations support our work educating food system storytellers. And when you donate, you can choose one of those cities and you'll be entered to win dinner and 2 tickets to a show. So help us reach our goal and enter to win dinner and a show in the city of your choice. Check out heritageradionetwork.org/15 to donate and enter to win today. That's heritageradionetwork.org/15. Thank you.
This piece was brought to you by Underground Meats, undergroundmeats.com.
I'm Greg Blaze, host of Cutting the Curd. You're listening to Heritage Radio Network, broadcasting live from Bushwick, Brooklyn. If you like this program, visit heritageradionetwork.org for thousands more.
All right. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Heritage Radio Network. We are coming to you live, as always, from the back of Roberta's Pizza here in Bushwick, Brooklyn on a kind of sunny but cold winter day. You're tuned into the Farm Report. I'm your host, Erin Fairbanks. We've got another jam-packed show for you today. At the top of the show, we're going to be speaking with Todd Erling. Todd is the Executive Director of the Hudson Valley AgriBusiness Development Corporation. And we're going to learn a little bit more about his work and some kind of recent announcements from the Cuomo's office. And then in the second half of the show, we'll be joined by Larissa Walker. She is the Pollinator Campaign Director at the Center for Food Safety. So we're going to get a little overview and update on the state of pollinators here in the U.S. And maybe touch a little bit on them more broadly around the world. Before we jump in with Todd, I want to give just a quick announcement. If folks have been following the Craig Watts story, the Purdue poultry farmer down in North Carolina who is suing Purdue, there's some developments in that story. Fusion Network at fusion.net has just released an extended video kind of documenting Craig's farm and his work with a quite salacious title, Cockfight, Meet the Farmer Blowing the Whole... Let's see, let me start from the top. I got tangled in it. It's Cockfight, Meet the Farmer Blowing the Whistle on Big Chicken. So you can definitely learn more about that campaign and Craig's work and the pending lawsuit and continue to follow that story. He was a guest on the Farm Report from episode 219. So check that out if you haven't already, and we will continue to keep you posted on that conversation. But for now, let's look a little bit more locally here. Todd, thank you so much for joining us. It's great to have you on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
I was like, starting out with a little bit of a mouthful here, but I think it's all downhill from here.
We're doing all right. It's actually a little snowy up here in the Hudson Valley today, so glad to hear the sun's coming our way.
Yeah, I'm like, I'll like kind of blow it in your general direction to the extent that I can.
We'll take it.
So Hudson Valley AgriBusiness Development Corporation, give us the lowdown. Can you've been their executive director for a bit now. What is kind of the purview of your work through them, and what's getting you excited? What's keeping you up at nights? Give us the lowdown.
Sure. So starting from the beginning, we were actually born of an American Farmland Trust report. Often studies and reports, they can sit on a shelf and get dusty. But we were working with Jerry Cosgrove, who was the Northeast director at the time, and I was working in traditional economic development and community development in the Hudson Valley in Columbia County. Columbia County economic development and community development often revolves around agriculture, or agriculture is integrated into those issues for Columbia County. And the American Farmland Trust Report looked at challenges of the Hudson Valley from a local foods and farm perspective, and came up with some recommendations a need for a regional entity to be focusing on agriculture as economic development, a need for a strategic plan that included agriculture with other economic development initiatives, technical assistance, business planning, strategy development, market feasibility study for agriculture and ag-related, ag-dependent business that was on par with traditional economic development offerings, and then the creation and enhancement of dedicated capital funding for the food system and for farm-related business.
I was just saying, show me the money. Yeah, I'm always like coming around to like, where's the cash?
You got it. So that's really what we were born of, and we now represent 7 counties in the Hudson Valley. We work directly with either the county economic development offices or the arms that are responsible for economic development in the county, and we work to integrate the programs and the offerings of economic development from a county, state, and federal level into the food system.
So you guys are obviously, your purview, you need to be kind of good at, I feel like, a lot of different things, but also just kind of know what's going on in a lot of different kind of areas, because I think for your work to be successful as someone who is essentially kind of a connector and someone who's ensuring kind of a streamlined process and quality, you need to be up on kind of what's happening in a bunch of different areas. So how does your group kind of stay in tune, or how do you put a team together that keeps your finger on the pulse of issues from like what does the market look like? What are people interested in buying from the region? And also what are people producing, or kind of the cyclical changes of, the ag industry?
Right. You hit the nail on the head, and your observation was very astute. Value chain coordination or value chain facilitating, which is some of the terminology that's come about since we started Hudson Valley AgriBusiness, is really a dynamic role in the food system. As you mentioned, you're really trying to stay attuned to production, to the farmer's needs and the farmer's challenges. And then you're also trying to stay attuned to what the market will support, or what the gaps are in getting the product to the market. And then there's a lot of points in between. And you also need to be able to kind of keep your finger on the pulse of the alphabet soup of federal funding, state funding, local level support. And one of the neatest, kind of most exciting aspects to what's happening in the New York City food shed and the Hudson Valley and the Northeast are these other funding sources, the PRI, program-related investment, the MRI, the mission-related investment, and some non-traditional capital sources that are entering into the food system and wanting to play a role and complement banks and other traditional lending and grant programs. It's a really exciting time to be involved in this work.
So why the Hudson Valley? I mean, obviously if you're looking at the region, there's what I'm looking at the report here, or the press release here, it says that 18% of the 11 county regions land is constituting farmland. So obviously there's a lot of kind of volume of land in ag production, but how did you end up in the Hudson Valley region, and is what's happening with your team there being kind of like mimicked, or was it bouncing off things that are happening in different parts of New York State, or did you have to look outside of New York for kind of inspiration and guidance when you were setting up the kind of systems, or even now when you're kind of troubleshooting?
Sure. So the Hudson Valley is in a unique position geographically, being a gateway to the New York metro market. It's not only for the farmers and the food companies that are located within the footprint, but also as a keystone connecting the farmers in northern New York and central and western New York, accessing that market. But we also sit at the crossroads for the Boston and New England markets, as well as Philadelphia and the Mid-Atlantic. We have a map and a program update that we just published, and it's available on our website, and it's called an Eater's Map. And we look at the Hudson Valley being the center of about a 5-hour radius as far as a driving access area. And you're looking at about 60 million mouths, over 20 million households in that 5-hour radius. It's really an epicenter to market accessibility. So some of that is making sure our farmers who grow here have direct access to the markets. But it's also creating the infrastructure, like the press release was highlighting, so that the processing and distribution outlets service the much larger market and service the much larger footprint of access for farmers and producers.
And I want to touch a little bit more on the Kingston Food Hub in just one second. But before we get there, you mentioned the proximity of the region to so many major metropolitan areas. Why is it important to keep that area in agriculture? I mean, I'm sure there's development pressure kind of up the wazoo. Like, can you talk a little bit about why folks who reside in New York City or Brooklyn, like myself, have a real stake in the Hudson Valley continuing to be a strong kind of agriculture region?
Absolutely. First and foremost is food security. While we do have the technology and the fossil fuels and resources to move food from anywhere in the world into our homes and onto our plates, logic prevails, and I think ultimately environmental concerns, resources, and economic concerns will push us to returning to the more regionalized food systems that we relied on at different times of our civilization and culture. So first and foremost, you have that, the adjacent area. And it's not just the Hudson Valley. You have New Jersey and eastern Pennsylvania and very, very fertile, well-developed agricultural regions within close proximity to the New York metro area and the Northeast. You also have areas that still receive rain and water, albeit sometimes in amounts that are too much and a bit overwhelming. We've had some 100-year storms kind of back-to-back over the last decade. But the bottom line is we're still receiving, and we still have the ability to grow food and receive that rain. But really looking at it from a community viewpoint, we recognize that agriculture and food systems are really about rural-urban relationships. And Hudson Valley AgriBusiness has taken it upon ourselves to start highlighting this rural-urban opportunity. And it's not just about food or products flowing into New York City or the metro areas of our country. It's also about the capital and the human interaction that happens there. It's not a single direction flow. It's actually reciprocal. Our rural areas rely on the capital and rely on goods and services that come from outside of our footprint. And so we really want to highlight and strengthen that reciprocal relationship so that we recognize it's not just about a pretty view. It's not just about having somewhere to go on the weekend and getting away from the urban jungle. It goes much deeper than that, and it's very systemic, both from a cultural and economic capital perspective.
Yeah, and I think I just feel like you cannot emphasize that connection and that interdependency enough. I think it's something that we, we're strong. We're definitely stronger together, and I think we also get to eat better together.
Absolutely.
Let's shift gears here. I want to talk a little bit about the Kingston Food Hub. Kind of exciting, some big figures coming out of there. I'm looking here that throughout the 2014 harvest, the Food Hub purchased and processed more than 200,000 pounds of New York farm products in order to fulfill the contract. And that they also were the hub that processed the Blue Hill savory yogurts. I'm actually quite a fan of those. But I want to, before we get into kind of some of the nuts and bolts that are outlined here, when you're talking about a food hub for your team, can we be just clear with listeners kind of what we mean by that?
Yeah, that's kind of fuzzy depending on the situation, and that term is used a lot and is increasingly kind of growing in use. For this situation, the Food Hub represents two private businesses, Hudson Valley Harvest and Farm to Table Co-Packers, They are two independent facilities and businesses on the same campus of a former IBM manufacturing facility in Kingston, New York. The facility is known as Tech City during this adaptive reuse phase. And Farm to Table Co-Packers is a processing facility that offers packing services for farms and non-farm private label businesses. Hudson Valley Harvest is actually a client of Farm to Table Co-Packers. They have farmer product processed there, but they do much more than that. They also are a distributor of product that is processed in other parts of the state and fresh product that comes directly from farmers. So for us, the Food Hub is really kind of this cluster of these two businesses working together, complementing one another, and finding new reciprocal synergies to access market for New York farms.
And I don't want to dwell on this too much, but can you maybe give us some examples of what were some of the challenges getting this kind of work off the ground? What were the kind of roadblocks or snags that you hit, and how did you kind of find solutions and help people kind of push through some initial hurdles?
Sure. First and foremost for us, it's finding an entrepreneur. And in this case, Paul Allward and Sam Ullman were two of the original founders of Hudson Valley Harvest. Jim Highland, who's president and CEO of Farm to Table Co-Packers, was really the entrepreneurial spirit and not just the driving force, but also putting his own personal capital into the project. Jim had a brand, Winter Sun Farms, which some of your listeners may be familiar with, that in the 2006-2007 range was kind of a frozen food CSA with transparently identified packages into the New York City area primarily. The challenge was where he was having the farm product frozen during the summer, during the harvest, and then stored to be delivered in the off-season to his subscribers, went out of business. And so Jim worked with several other people to start up, and brands to start up Farm to Table Co-Packers. Farm to Table Co-Packers is really a neat story in that, yes, you have Winter Sun Farm brand, yes, you have Hudson Valley Harvest brand there, and both of those buy product from New York farmers and label it Winter Sun or Hudson Valley Harvest, but transparently identify on the package the farm's name and location that the product came from. So Amy Hepworth tomatoes, Kenny Miglarelli apples. But Farm to Table Co-Packers goes so much further because they'll actually also co-pack and give product back to a farmer to sell directly, either at their farm stand, at their farm market, through their own CSA. And then the last really unique opportunity of Farm to Table Co-Packers is they will use non-farm brands, Rick's Picks, Spacey Tracy's Pickles, and they will actually buy New York farm product because Savory Hill, another example, or Blue Hill Savory Yogurt, another example of making sure that the non-farm label knows where the product's coming from and that it is being grown and produced right in New York or the Northeast or the proximity that's dictated by the value of the brand.
So kind of some, initial snags like turning into new opportunities. And also it sounds very much like meeting producers where they're at, kind of providing the services that they kind of want or need to serve their customers and facilitate their business, and less kind of making folks kind of bend to one way. I mean, would that be a correct kind of characterization?
Yeah, some of the unique features of Farm to Table Co-Packers is on the scale of most farms, getting their products back in a jar as a sauce or getting their product back individually frozen in bags is pretty expensive. That equipment's expensive. The manual label and handling of it is pretty expensive. But when you have a facility like Farm to Table that is actually servicing SUNY contracts and the Chartwell's contract that we talked about, 10 New York schools, 8 schools, colleges and universities in Connecticut, you start gaining efficiencies in volume. And so Jim and Farm to Table Co-Packers and Paul and Hudson Valley Harvest are able to tailor to some of the local farms' needs and economies because they're working in these larger market opportunities that can offset and gain some efficiencies in scale.
Well, we just have a few moments left here, and I want to talk quickly about how the governor's office. I feel like Cuomo's name's at the top of your release, and it's definitely we've been seeing. Here at the studio, a number of press releases as related to kind of innovations or investments in the agriculture or the food sector coming down from the governor's office. What difference does it make to your work to have support at that level?
Yeah, it's a great two-way street. We've developed a wonderful relationship along with peer groups like Scenic Hudson, American Farmland Trust, the Local Economies Project, working with the governor's regional council process that he's established. I'm a voting member and on the executive team of the Capital Region Economic Development Council. So having an administration, both the governor, but also his appointments, our Commissioner of Agriculture, Richard Ball, who is a well-respected vegetable farmer, and I've had the pleasure of working with side by side for years on Farm Bureau trips and local food projects like Corbin Hill. We really are starting to have a strong collaborative spirit with Albany. And then the other part that I would mention is just how Albany and New York City have renewed the connection, and that there's now an office, reopened in Brooklyn for Ag and Markets. Empire State Development, which is the economic development arm of New York State's government, has opened up craft beverage opportunities and funding competitive food hubs in other parts of the state. So it's a new time where we actually have an audience with the governor, and the governor and his team are asking, what are the needs? Where's the capital that we need to focus to change and benefit these local food system opportunities?
Well, Todd, I know folks can visit the website, www.hvadc.org, to learn more about your work, but what's the best way for them to be supporting what you're doing and producers and farmers in the Hudson Valley?
Well, currently, Scenic Hudson, American Farmland Trust, Open Space, and many of the land conservancies in the Hudson Valley are working to support the governor's proposal of appropriating a standalone $20 million amount to preserve farmland in the Hudson Valley in the upcoming 2015-2016 state budget. If you go to Scenic Hudson's website or American Farmland Trust website, there's some links to actually how to let state officials know that this is important, not just to the Hudson Valley, but to the food system and the food shed that relies on the Hudson Valley, and that it will actually set a precedent so that we can launch programs like this for other areas that have high pressure, like Long Island, some of the Finger Lakes areas. And, it can actually bring New York to the forefront of farmland conservation. It begins with preserving the soil, but we also have to work on the food hubs and the distribution and the market access. So by recognizing that farmland conservation is critical to the economic development perspective of local food systems, we'll all be sending a really strong message to our leadership.
Todd, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure connecting, and I look forward to having you back soon.
Many thanks for the opportunities. I always enjoy working together and can't wait to see you up here in the Hudson Valley again.
Awesome. All right. Well, folks, hang tight. We're going to take a quick station break, and when we come back, we'll be on the line with Larissa Walker, the Pollinator Campaign Director at the Center for Food Safety. Hang tight.
Today's program is brought to you by Underground Meats. We're proud to count Underground Meats as a business member of Heritage Radio Network. Located in downtown Madison, Wisconsin, Underground Meats creates handcrafted salami and cured meats. They source from the nation's most quality pasture-raised heritage pigs and goats. The Underground Collective also offers a variety of classes and workshops. We encourage you to visit undergroundmeats.com to learn more. You can also get your own Underground Meats care package by becoming a VIP member of Heritage Radio Network. Visit heritageradionetwork.org/donate for more.
We are students at Girls Prep, and you're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
And we're back. We are joined in the second half of the show by Larissa Walker. Larissa is the Pollinator Campaign Director at the Center for Food Safety, joining us from down in D.C. Larissa, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks. Great to be here.
So before we jump in, I wonder if you can tell us why at the Center for Food Safety is it important to have someone whose work is committed to pollinators?
Well, Center for Food Safety, we're a national nonprofit organization, and we work to protect public health and the environment by curbing the impacts of industrial agriculture and instead promoting sustainable forms of agriculture and organic agriculture. And the pollinator program really took off a few years ago here when a number of pollinator species started suffering adverse impacts from uses of certain pesticides. So it's quite relevant to our mission and also our member interests to protect these critical species.
So when we're talking about pollinators, what are we talking about?
So we're talking about honeybees, many wild bees like bumblebees, monarch butterflies, birds, bats, beetles. I mean, there are a number of species that pollinate, but the primary pollinators are definitely bees, whether managed or wild.
And so when you're kind of like dividing your work time up or figuring out like what campaigns you're going to focus on for the year, how do you kind of create a hierarchy? What amount of your work is kind of offensive and what is kind of defensive, reacting to things that are kind of happening out in the world more broadly?
Yeah, I'd say it's a pretty even split for the most part. I mean, I think a lot of what we're doing is somewhat responsive to what's actually happening out in the agricultural arena and what's happening on the ground, such as pesticide issues. So we are responding to a lot of concerns that are arising from those issues, but we're also doing a lot of, proactive work with outreach and encouraging the public to take, really great steps to help us protect these species and raise awareness about the issue. So I'd say it's pretty evenly divided.
So I feel like, kind of in the media generally for the last couple of years, we've been hearing these dire reports, honeybees are in danger, monarch butterflies are on the brink of extinction. Are things as dire as that? I mean, what is the landscape as we sit, here in 2015?
Mm-hmm. Things are definitely dire. I mean, the situation that's occurring right now with honeybees in particular is quite concerning because they are such efficient pollinators for many of the foods that we rely on. It's estimated that pollinators, and specifically bees, are responsible for about 1 in every 3 bites of food we eat. So the fact that their numbers are declining as rapidly as they are is concerning. But beyond population declines, many species of pollinators, such as bees and butterflies, also just are suffering from poor health, and they're just not as efficient in pollinating, and they're not as productive as they once were. So the loss of honeybees has definitely hit a peak here in the U.S. We definitely are seeing commercial beekeepers and urban and backyard beekeepers reporting alarmingly high overwintering losses and losses of their colonies all year round. And that's a problem. It's very challenging for beekeepers to keep up with pollination demands and keep their hives healthy. And with monarch butterflies, I mean, that situation is also quite concerning. We've seen monarch butterfly populations decline by over 90% in under 20 years.
Wow.
So it's really, really big.
And are these, are the kind of issues as they relate to declines of populations and kind of reduction in the health of the pollinators, are these things that we're seeing specifically here in the U.S., or is this a global issue?
It's a global issue. I mean, this has been, particularly with honeybees, we've seen a lot of countries really look at this issue closely over the last couple of decades, and even more so in the last few years with respect to a connection to pesticide use. And that's been a real big issue lately in the European Union. In fact, about a year ago, they took action to suspend certain uses of industrial pesticides because of concerns for honeybee losses. So it's definitely a global issue. We need pollinators all over the world for our food supply and also for our ecosystem health.
So I want to get something clear for folks, like where do bees come from? I mean, without being like too elementary, where does that process begin? Kind of how are they kind of grown, or are there like bee or honeybee farms? What's the kind of source of honeybees?
I think the ultimate source of honeybees might be a little off from that, but would be the beekeepers. But, honeybees are not a native bee species to North America. North America is home to over 4,000 species of wild bees, but honeybees were brought to the U.S. in about the 1600s, and we've been managing honeybees ever since then. So there are, honeybees that are produced. There are a number of beekeepers who are queen producers, and so they'll produce queens, and those queens can be, purchased by commercial beekeepers, and then they can use the queens and introduce them into their hives. But honeybees also survive on their own in the U.S. now. They have been introduced here, so there are wild honeybee hives that exist without beekeepers' assistance. But most of the honeybees here in the U.S. are kept and managed by beekeepers.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that honeybees weren't. I guess, like, my assumption was, like, they were just always here and around, and then someone, like, rounded a few up, and we went from there. But,
yeah, I think honeybees often, we like to say they steal the pollinator spotlight because everyone's most familiar with them. But, in fact, there's all these really incredible species of wild bees that are native to the U.S. and North America. And they often don't get the credit or attention that they deserve because they're quite impressive pollinators as well, and equally important to our food supply.
So when you're looking across a geographic region as large as the United States, with so many different kind of climates and regions and areas, are we seeing these the declines are happening kind of equally across the board, or declines happening in concentrated areas? When you're looking to kind of analyze why this is happening, I feel like for me, I want to know kind of where it's happening first, and then hopefully that would inform why, but maybe it doesn't work like that.
Sure. No, it's a great question, and I think one of the issues we have in the U.S. is that we aren't actively tracking the population status of wild bees. It's very hard to do that. We don't have scientists on the ground who are all over the country looking at what is going on with these thousands of species of wild bees here. But we do have beekeepers, and they are our best kind of barometers for what is the health and population of honeybees in the U.S. And so across the country, there are beekeepers, in every area of the U.S. who are experiencing losses and poor colony health. But, more so what we've seen in the last decade or so has been a lot of beekeepers reporting abnormal losses or acute bee kills where their honeybees are just dying outright when they are near agricultural fields. And that would be usually the result of a pesticide, related bee kill.
So why is it not as simple as just saying, like, okay, hey, stop using this pesticide?
I think one of the reasons it's not that simple is because a lot of farmers have begun to rely on certain, pesticides as a tool. And one of the most concerning aspects to a particular type of pesticide that's been kind of in the spotlight with respect to bee kills and poor pollinator health has been a class of systemic insecticides called neonicotinoids, or neonics for short. And those chemicals are actually coated onto a lot of the seeds that we use for annual field crops. So the majority of corn, canola, cotton, wheat, soybean seeds, they're all coated with this insecticide. So a lot of times, farmers don't even have a choice whether or not to use these chemicals. It's just that's how we're selling these products now.
So what do we do?
I think one thing we do is make sure there's a lot of attention around the issue, and we educate people. Another thing we're doing is working on this issue in a legal arena. So we, Center for Food Safety, has filed a lawsuit against the Environmental Protection Agency for failure to protect honeybees and other pollinator species from the harms of these chemicals, because there is a wealth of scientific evidence. I mean, it's just skyrocketed the amount of peer-reviewed scientific studies that have come out in the last decade or so, which indicate harms from these specific chemicals, the neonics, to pollinators and bees in particular. So there is legal action happening, which is great. There are members of Congress who have raised concerns about this, and there's been legislation introduced to suspend uses of these particularly harmful chemicals. And there's been a lot of grassroots support and activism across the country trying to educate people to avoid using these chemicals in their backyards and gardens, and also encourage, public lands within their communities to stop using these products as well. We use them everywhere. The most widely used insecticides in the world.
So no small task. Now, are the monarchs, are they susceptible in the same way that the honeybees are to these pesticides? Is it an overlapping issue, or is it a different thing that is causing the frankly insane decline in the monarchs?
Definitely, it is an insane decline. There's a little bit of overlap. So the same insecticides that are harming bees, there's been some preliminary research that's come out, actually some just in the last week or so, that has indicated that these are actually harmful to monarch larvae and also to the longevity of monarch butterflies. But that's preliminary research, and there does need to be more on neonics and the impact to monarchs. But the monarch issue more broadly is actually a little bit different, but still within the frame of problems with our industrial agriculture system, and that's the issue of herbicides. So particularly glyphosate, which is also known as Roundup as the brand name, has been detrimental to milkweed populations, specifically within the Midwest area, the Corn Belt region, where a lot of the eastern population of monarch butterflies breed, and that's the population that we're all very familiar with and love to watch as they migrate south to Mexico. It's an incredible species. But the herbicide issue and wiping out milkweed plants has really been the big issue that's facing monarch butterflies right now, and still is.
So what do we lose? What do we lose if tomorrow we wake up and we have no bees and we have no monarch butterfly? What's at risk here?
There are a lot of things at risk. I think first and foremost, our food supply is at risk, and I don't say that we wouldn't have any food to eat, because that's not true. We don't, pollinators are not responsible for every single crop out there, but they are responsible for giving us a really healthy and diverse food supply. So many of our favorite fruits and vegetables would not be available to us, certainly in the quantities that they are now. That's concerning, but beyond that, they're also, critical to a healthy and functioning ecosystem. We, think of honeybees and even monarch butterflies as indicator species. So if they are not doing well, it's usually indicative of a larger environmental problem, and there are probably many other species that we're not even aware of that are suffering as well from many of the same problems. And that's just not good all around.
So kind of in some ways they are like a stand-in for the canary in the coal mine.
Yes, and we actually, there's a renowned monarch butterfly scientist, Dr. Lincoln Brower, who has coined a term I'm quite fond of in calling the monarch butterfly the canary in the cornfield. So I think it's quite spot on in this case.
Well, I want to ask you about something. So, and I'm not sure that you're going to be able to speak to this, so if you're not, no problem. But I was talking with Steve Wood of Poverty Lane Orchards and Farnham Hill Ciders, an apple grower and cider producer here in the Northeast, about the Arctic apple, the world's first kind of genetically engineered apple that has just been approved and potentially may come to market in the coming years. And I'm wondering how, if that type of news kind of impacts your work with pollinators and how you kind of hear that and respond to it and what your thoughts are.
Yeah, well, the Arctic apple is something that we've definitely been concerned about here at CFS. We've been tracking the kind of move of that through the regulatory process, but I think there are a lot of concerns with many elements of our industrial agricultural system, and genetic engineering is one of them. And a lot of cases, it's problematic because genetically engineered crops go hand in hand with increased pesticide use. And that's certainly been the case with genetically engineered Roundup-ready crops like corn and soybeans. Those crops have really been what's led to a big spike in the use of glyphosate and other herbicides, Roundup, on corn and soybean fields. And it's that crop and those uses that's wiped out milkweed species. So genetic engineering in general, when it causes increases in pesticides, we have a lot of concerns for that. But the Arctic apple, there are a lot of uncertainties there. We really don't know. This is a type of genetic engineering where there's not a lot of science showing the safety of these types of technologies, and that's something that I think we should be concerned about.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks. I just, was thinking, because we had Steve on the show last week, wanted to hear your thoughts. Well, I know folks, if they want to learn more about the work, they can visit the website, centerforfoodsafety.org. They can click, through to the pollinator section, but you guys also do work in many other areas. For the pollinator campaign specifically, what's the best way for people to get involved right now or support your work?
The best way to get involved is to sign some of the petitions we have going on right now. Fish and Wildlife Service is currently considering listing monarch butterflies as a threatened species under the Endangered Species Act, so it's really critical that we get a lot of public support for that action, and you can sign a petition on our website to do so. It's also really important that people contact their members of Congress. There's support for these issues in Congress, thankfully, and the more that they hear from their constituents that pollinators are something people are concerned about, that's great. So I definitely encourage that. And go out and plant some pollinator-friendly habitat. Just make sure you don't use any pesticides on it.
Well, because I know you're located down in D.C., this is a question I was asking Todd, who was with us in the first half of the show. I'm wondering if there are particular legislators that you would like to shine a light on for their leadership on this issue.
Definitely. I think Representatives John Conyers and Earl Blumenauer have been just incredible in terms of the steps they've taken to protect pollinator species. So a big thanks to both of them for introducing the Saving America's Pollinators Act. So they're definitely that's the gold standard for pollinator protection right now on the Hill.
Yeah, I think it's one of those interesting things as we're thinking more and more about, how our elected officials are shaping and influencing our food supply. I definitely want to take note to point out folks who are supporting the work and then for folks who are maybe working in the opposite direction. But regardless, Larissa, I want to thank you so much for taking some time to join us and inform us briefly on the work that you're doing and on the current state of the pollinator landscape. I really appreciate you having us as part of your day.
Thanks for having me on. Thank you so much.
Thanks to both of my excellent guests today. That was Todd Erling at the top of the show. He is the executive director at the Hudson Valley AgriBusiness Development Corporation. You can find them at hvadc.org. And then we were just speaking with Larissa from the Pollinator Campaign. Their website is centerforfoodsafety.org. And definitely check out fusion.net to check out the video with Craig Watts, a poultry farmer, from episode 219 of the Farm Report. This show, like all 39 of our weekly programs, is available for free. You can find all of our great programming by visiting www.heritageradionetwork.org. If you follow us on iTunes or Stitcher, please subscribe. Always great for the shows to have those subscriber numbers up there. Leave a review. Shoot me an email to aaron@heritageradionetwork.org if there's something you'd like to hear more of or less of. Would love to hear from you. And then you can, of course, follow me on Twitter. It's Aaron_Fairbanks. I look forward to hearing from you and definitely hope you'll be tuning in next week for another episode of The Farm Report.
Thanks for listening to this program on heritageradionetwork.org. You can find all of our archive programs on our website or as podcasts in the iTunes store by searching Heritage Radio Network. You can like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at @heritage_radio. You can email us questions anytime at info@heritageradionetwork.org. Heritage Radio Network is a 501c3 non-profit. To donate and become a member, visit our website today. Thanks for listening.